In a small office tucked away on Capitol Hill, Jasmine Crockett walked in slow circles, a coffee cup in one hand, and her other hand brushing over a neat stack of papers on the desk. Outside her window, DC buzzed as usual. But in this room, it was quiet, just the low hum of a laptop fan and the occasional ding from a glitchy video call software trying to reconnect. Jasmine had done interviews, debates, even press battles before, but today felt different. This was a call with the president of Burkina Faso, something her team had marked as routine. 20 minutes, broad pleasantries, a few lines about policy cooperation, and that would be it. But she wasn't feeling routine, not today. Thousands of miles away in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré sat behind a wide wooden desk. His morning was packed, like every other one lately. The briefing paper in front of him listed 10 meetings, 5 urgent memos, and 1 call with a U.S. representative, named Jasmine Crockett. He barely glanced at the name, just enough to remember this was one of those scheduled check-ins, likely with someone reading off cue cards and offering vague support in rehearsed phrases. He poured himself tea without much interest and waited for the call to connect. Back in D.C., Jasmine stared at her reflection in the black screen before it flickered on. Her notes were ready, safe, polished, prepared by her staff. But deep down, she felt they weren't enough. They didn't match what she really wanted to say. As the connecting icon disappeared and President Traoré's face appeared on screen, she smiled politely and followed the script. So did he. "It's a pleasure to meet you. We value our partnership. Let's continue to strengthen our cooperation." The usual. It was like reading lines in a play neither of them believed in. But then, right as her voice trailed off at the end of a sentence, Jasmine paused. She looked straight into the camera. Her fingers slid the papers away from her view, and her tone changed, softer, but clearer. "Mr. President," she said, this time not as a politician but as a person, "I'd like to talk about dignity." There was a silence, just for a beat. On the other end, Traoré lifted his eyes. The air in the call, once stiff with formality, suddenly felt heavier, realer. Neither of them knew it yet, but that one sentence was about to change everything. Jasmine took a small breath and let the papers sit untouched on the desk in front of her. She didn't need them, not for this, not for what she was about to say. Her voice was steady, not loud but full, like every word came from somewhere real. She started by saying she didn't come to talk numbers or policy points. She came to talk about something that gets left out of most official calls. Dignity. Not the kind that's written into documents or passed in budgets, but the kind that lives in the way people are treated when no one is watching. The kind that shows up when a child goes to school and feels seen, or when a mother in a village clinic is given care without having to ask twice. She looked into the camera and told President Traoré that she had been following his work for a while. Not because someone told her to not, because it was part of her job, but because something about it stood out. She had seen how he pushed for schools in places where there were none, how he found ways to support clinics that didn't even have roofs. She said those things reminded her of home, reminded her of the communities back in America, where people were also told to wait, to be patient, to keep hoping without ever being heard. She said leadership wasn't about speeches or suits. It was about showing up and doing the hard things when the cameras weren't rolling. And she said she saw him doing that again and again, and that meant something to her. Then she paused for just a moment, looked straight at him and said, the line that would carry far beyond that call: "Africa doesn't need saving, it needs to be heard." The translator repeated it, slowly, and something in the room shifted. Even through the screen you could feel it. President Traoré stopped moving, his hand froze halfway to his cup. His eyes didn't blink. He wasn't thinking of how to respond or what to say next. He was just there, present, quiet, caught in something too big for words. And as Jasmine finished speaking, she didn't close with some big pitch or call to action. She just let the silence speak, and it did louder than anything else. It was the kind of silence that holds meaning, that says, "I see you and I respect you. Not because of where you sit, but because of what you stand for. The call ended without fanfare, no headlines, no breaking news alert, but in that quiet ending something real had been said and someone had truly listened. Nobody planned for it to happen that way. But within hours of the call, Jasmine's words started to move faster than anyone could track. Someone clipped the moment and posted it on Twitter. Then it landed on WhatsApp in group chats from Nairobi to Bamako. By the next day, it was on Facebook and Instagram with subtitles in 3 languages. The line that everyone kept repeating was the one she said. So simply, Africa doesn't need saving. It needs to be heard. It didn't matter where you were or what language you spoke. The message hit something deep. It wasn't about borders, it was about being seen. In a village outside Bobo Dioulasso, a group of kids crowded around a shared phone screen, watching her face light. Up in the dark, a generator hummed in the background, while elders sat nearby, nodding slowly as the clip played again and again at a small school where chalk was still used on cracked blackboards. A student stood up and wrote the words across the wall. No one told her to. She just felt it was right. The teacher didn't stop her. Instead, she read the words aloud, and the class stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because they understood. Meanwhile, across the ocean in cities like Detroit and Atlanta, community centers were packed for weekend gatherings. Jasmine's clip played between local news and old speeches by leaders from the past. But hers didn't feel like a history lesson. It felt alive in barbershops in Philly. People argued and smiled, and shared stories about being overlooked in churches in Mississippi. Preachers used her speech as the base for entire sermons, saying she didn't just speak for Africa, she spoke for every block, every corner, every family that ever got told to wait their turn or stay quiet. One high school in Chicago, a group of teens started a hallway board where anyone could write what they wanted to say. If someone was really listening, the board filled up in 2 days. One student wrote, "I don't want to be told what I can't be. I want to be asked what I need in New York." A small bookstore put Jasmine's quote on a display window, not to sell books, but because it made people stop and think even for just a second. Civil rights groups picked it up too, not just as a good speech, but as proof that someone in power could actually care and say it out loud. Organizers started calling it the dignity moment, the moment someone in Congress didn't speak from a script, but from somewhere honest. And the truth is, that kind of moment doesn't stay small. It grows, it spreads. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. And when something real shows up in a world used to noise, people feel it and they pass it on without needing to be told to. The praise didn't last long. The way things move online, it never does by the next morning. Clips of Jasmine's speech were already being picked apart on cable news shows. The same people who usually stayed quiet during talks about dignity suddenly had a lot to say. One anchor smiled tightly before playing her quote, and then turned to a guest who called it emotional theater. Another said she was being naive, that her words were pretty but useless. Then came Representative Roger Clean standing in front of flags and flashing lights, acting like he was the adult in the room. He looked into the camera with that calm, smug smile and said, "Let's not confuse passion with policy." It was the kind of line designed to sound smart while saying nothing. He claimed Jasmine was romanticizing a dictator, giving praise to someone who didn't deserve it. Jasmine heard all of it, and she didn't stay quiet. The next day, she showed up on an independent live stream with no script, no teleprompter, and no fancy background, just her voice and a wired mic. She leaned into the camera and said, "Maybe the real problem isn't that I praised a leader. Maybe it's that we've spent years praising silence. We've been told it's better to smile and say nothing than to speak up and risk being uncomfortable." Her voice didn't shake. It was steady and sharp, not angry but clear. Like someone who's tired of pretending, she said, "I didn't praise him because he has power. I praised him because he uses to build schools, to fund clinics, to serve people who are used to being forgotten. And if that makes people upset, maybe the question isn't about my words. Maybe it's about what they're trying not to see." The clip of that moment spread even faster than her original speech this time. It wasn't just activists sharing it. It was high school students, pastors, teachers, people who had never followed politics before, but heard something in her words that felt different. A preacher in Georgia played her quote during a Sunday service. A teacher in Houston printed it out and taped it to the classroom wall. She didn't sound like someone trying to win a debate. She sounded like someone telling the truth. And truth like that has a way of cutting through everything else. Few days after the call, President Traoré asked for the car. No cameras, no big speechwriters, no press team, just him. One driver and an aide. The road was long, dry, and full of bumps, but he didn't seem to mind the farther they got from the city. The quieter everything became. The air smelled like dust and mango trees, and the small houses looked like they hadn't changed in years. But that was the point. He wasn't going there. To see the village was small. Just a few rows of homes, some chickens running across the path, and children watching from the shade. When his car pulled in, there was no music, no official welcome, no stage. Just people curious and waiting. Word had spread fast that the president was coming, and even faster that it had something to do with that woman from the video. The one who said Africa didn't need saving. Just to be heard, a boy stepped forward. Skinny with wide eyes and clay on his fingers, he held something wrapped in cloth, and without saying a word he handed it to the president. Traoré knelt down and opened it. Inside was a drum carved from wood and worn at the edges, but beautiful in its own way. On the side were 5 words cut into the surface: not perfect, not clean, but clear. Respect speaks louder than power. The president didn't say anything. He just looked at the boy, then at the drum, and for a moment he forgot about meetings and borders and politics. Before he could stand, another voice called out. A girl, maybe 8, maybe 9, wearing a dress that was just a little too big, but her braids were neat and tight, like someone had taken time with her that morning. She held out a notebook and said softly, "This is mine. We got them at school last week." He asked what she had written. She opened the first page and read, "One day I'll be a teacher like you." It wasn't loud, but it landed like a stone in his chest. Not because it praised him, but because it trusted him. Kept walking through the village, past gardens and wells and small classrooms, until he reached the health clinic. It was simple: a few beds, some medicine, and a small waiting area. Outside on a bench was a little girl rocking a doll made from old fabric. Her hair was pulled back in a single ponytail, and her eyes followed him as he came closer. He knelt beside her and asked, "What's her name?" The girl looked up, smiled, and said, "Tomorrow," just like that. No explanation, no speech, just one word. And it hit him harder than anything he'd heard in months. In that moment he understood something Jasmine had tried to say. Being seen isn't about applause or headlines. It's about moments like this. A boy giving you something made with his own. Hands a girl writing down a dream, because someone gave her a notebook. A child naming her doll tomorrow, because she finally believes in one. And as he sat there next to her in the dust, the president wasn't thinking about politics. He was thinking about how real change starts not in offices but in places like this, where people don't want to be saved. They just want to be seen. And when they are, everything begins to shift. In Washington, D.C., a former schoolteacher named Lena Caldwell sat alone in a small community center, watching Jasmine's speech on repeat. The video wasn't fancy, just a clip someone shared on social media, but something about it stuck with her. It felt honest, not polished, not political, just human. Lena had spent years trying to get young people to care about leadership, about using their voice, but it always felt like a fight. She had watched students lose hope, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't think anyone was listening. Until now, she watched the video again. Then she called her old students, her friends, her neighbors, and said, "We're starting something." They called it "Hear Us First." It wasn't a campaign. It wasn't about votes. It was about voice. Lena wanted to build something that made people feel seen again, not just in politics, but in everyday life. So she opened the doors of the center, and kids showed up, some out of curiosity, some just for snacks, but they stayed because something real was happening. Teen boys, who usually shrugged off school, started a reading club just for them. They picked books that talked about struggle and strength, and started to see themselves in those pages. Moms who rode the late bus after double shifts came in with ideas for safer streets and better lighting. Not because someone promised change, but because they believed they could ask for it in a school hallway in Detroit. A student grabbed a piece of chalk and wrote Jasmine's words across the wall. When people are seen, they rise, no one erased it. The principal walked by and left it there because he saw students stopping to read it every day in Atlanta. A group of spoken word poets turned the quote into a performance piece. They didn't memorize it like a poem. They told it like a story. Their own story. In Chicago, a youth jazz band wrote a song inspired by the speech. They called it, "We Heard You." It didn't need words, just rhythm and heart. And when they played it at a local event, people stood still, not talking, just listening. The message kept moving. Not through headlines or politics, but through people, through murals painted on brick walls, through songs played in church basements, through kids who saw themselves in words they never expected to hear on a political stage. And that's how it spread, not like a trend, but like a feeling. Something passed from one person to the next, without needing to be explained. Jasmine had said dignity wasn't something to give or take, it was something to recognize. And that's exactly what was happening in these neighborhoods. People weren't waiting for permission anymore. They were standing up and saying, "We're here. And we matter, and this time we want to be heard first." The sun was high over the hills of Kadugu, and the school courtyard was full of noise and color. Children stood in line, some barefoot, some wearing mismatched shoes, but all smiling wide behind them. A new sign hung across the school gates. Bold letters. Painted by hand, it read, "The School of Belief." It wasn't just a name, it was a reminder of how far they'd come. Not because someone built them a fancy building, but because someone made them feel seen, made them believe they were worth it. The crowd waited under a soft breeze as a white screen rolled down across a wall and a projector hummed to life. Jasmine's face appeared bright and steady from her office in D.C. She smiled at the children and began speaking slowly. Her voice calm, but full of warmth. She told them, "You are not waiting to be great, you already are. You don't have to earn the right to be heard. It's already yours." Across the courtyard, little hands held onto each other and eyes stared at the screen like it was something magic. When the video ended, there was no loud music, no big applause, just a quiet kind of stillness, the kind that sinks deep and stays. President Traoré stepped forward, his voice low but clear. He pointed at the screen and said, "That woman didn't give us aid. She gave us belief, and belief is stronger than anything else. It's what builds schools, what makes dreams feel possible." The children looked at him not with fear or distance, but like he was one of them. Then a small hand went up. A boy near the front looked up and asked softly, "Will she ever come here?" The president knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "She already has," he said, "in your heart, later in Washington." Jasmine sat across from a reporter who asked the question. Everyone had been thinking, would you do it all again? Even knowing the pushback, the noise, the anger. Jasmine smiled, not the kind that hides something, but the kind that comes from peace, and answered yes. Because belief isn't always popular, but it's always necessary, and maybe that was the point from the beginning. Not to make headlines, not to go viral, but to remind people that they matter, and sometimes that's all it takes for a quiet moment to echo forever.